Most clothing brands treat a runway show like a moving catalog. Models walk out, you see the clothes, show ends. But Enfants Riches Déprimés uses the runway differently. For ERD, a runway show isn't simply a place to display products, it's a film, a ceremony, and an invitation into the brand's private universe. You may look at a brand like ERD and think you need an enormous budget, celebrity connections, or access to Paris Fashion Week to do something similar, but you don't need to recreate the size of an ERD show to learn from thinking behind it. You can apply the same principles to a small clothing brand, an online drop, a campaign, or even a presentation film with a few friends. Today, we're breaking down the Enfants Riches Déprimés runway method and why it works and how you can apply it to your own clothing brand without copying ERD's identity. Enfants Riches Déprimés, often shortened to ERD, was founded by artist and designer Henri Levy. The brand combines punk reference, damaged luxury, historical imagery, youth culture, fine tailoring, and deliberately uncomfortable ideas. But ERD's power doesn't come from distressed t-shirts alone, it comes from context. If you removed one ERD garment from its environment, you might see a distressed shirt, a leather jacket, or a carefully tailored pair of pants. But when that garment is surrounded by the brand's casting, soundtrack, photography, location, and mythology, it becomes something else. It feels like evidence from another world. ERD reveals that world without completely explaining it. This creates mystery, and mystery creates curiosity. A lot of new clothing brands make the opposite mistake. They explain everything. They explain the exact meaning of every graphic, every reference, and every design decision to tell the audience exactly what they are supposed to feel. But sometimes, the more that you explain, the smaller the brand's world becomes. ERD gives the audience enough information to become interested, but it leaves enough missing for people to develop their own interpretations. That is one reason people keep looking. So what is the ERD runway method? It can be understood through 6 major principles. Principle 1, build a world, not just a collection. ERD doesn't always begin with a random list of products, it begins within a universe. The clothing, casting, soundtrack, location, photography, and physical objects all appear to belong to the same cultural environment. The viewer isn't simply asking, would I wear that jacket? They're asking, who are these people, where do they come from, and what happened here? This is the first lesson that you can apply to your clothing brand. Your collection should feel like a chapter from a larger story. A lot of new brands create a hoodie, put a logo on it, photograph it against a wall, and call that a collection. There's nothing automatically wrong with that, but it does become difficult to build a strong emotional connection when the product doesn't appear to belong to anything larger. Before designing your next collection or campaign, try describing its world in one sentence. For example, a group of outsiders discovers a place where they are free to create their own identities. That one sentence can guide everything. The colors, the silhouettes, the music, the casting, the location, the lighting, the photography, even the way the models move. Maybe the beginning of your presentation feels cold and disconnected. The models enter separately and avoid looking at one another. As the presentation continues, the clothing becomes more expressive. The colors become more warmer. Models begin acknowledging each other. By the end, they no longer look like isolated people. They look like a community. Now, the clothing is part of a transformation. Your audience isn't only looking at another hoodie, they're watching a story unfold. That is the difference between selling an object and building a brand. Someone can copy an object. They can find a similar blank, use a similar color, and create a similar graphic. But your world is much harder to copy because it comes from your perspective, experiences, and your taste. The strongest brands don't only give you something to wear, they give you somewhere to belong. Now let's get into the second principle, which is principle 2, create a central character. ERD collections often feel as though they have been constructed around an imaginary person. That person may draw inspiration from musicians, artists, historical figures, or underground scenes, but those references are combined into someone new. This makes the collection feel emotionally coherent. Whenever you create a central character for your brand, you stop designing for the vague idea of everyone. You begin making specific choices. You can ask what that person would wear during the day, what they wear at night, what they do, what they want people to notice, what are they trying to hide, what would they keep for 10 years, and what would they wear until it completely falls apart. Before creating your next drop, develop a character. Ask yourself, who is this person? Where do they live? What do they desire? What have they lost? And what are they trying to escape? And what do they want to become? Why are they wearing those clothes? Maybe your character is someone who has never felt comfortable inside the world that they inherited. They don't want to join an existing culture, so they decide to create their own. At the beginning of the collection, their clothes function like protection. The fabrics are heavy, the silhouettes are closed, the colors are restrained. As the story develops, the character finds other people who understand them. The clothing becomes less defensive and more expressive. That transformation gives you a reason for every design decision. Your models don't all need to represent the same person. They could represent different emotions, memories, or stages within the character's development. One model could represent isolation, another could represent rebellion, and another could represent curiosity. Another could represent belonging. This turns styling into storytelling. And it also allows different members of your audience to recognize themselves inside of the collection. One viewer may connect with the rebellious character. Another may see themselves in the dreamer. The other person searching for the community. The audience doesn't need to identify with every character, but they do need to find one doorway into your world. Let's get into the third principle, which is use contradiction. ERD's identity is built through opposing ideas: wealth and decay, elegance and destruction, youth and death, traditional tailoring and rebellion, beauty and discomfort. And this contradiction gives the clothing tension. Without tension, a collection can be visually attractive but emotionally flat. If everything is perfectly beautiful, nothing challenges that beauty. If every garment is distressed, the distress eventually loses its effect. Contrast creates movement. A perfectly tailored jacket becomes more interesting when paired with something raw or damaged. A soft material becomes more noticeable besides a hard structure. A traditional garment can feel different when it is placed in a modern or uncomfortable environment. Your clothing brand needs to identify its own contradiction. Maybe your brand represents luxury and accessibility. Maybe it represents childhood and adulthood. Maybe it combines nature with technology. Maybe it explores privacy and exposure. Maybe your attention is between freedom and control. The important thing is that the contradiction needs to come from your brand. Don't automatically borrow ERD's punk references, distressed graphics, or nihilistic attitude. Those elements work specifically for ERD because they are part of its established identity. If you copy only the surface, you may create something that looks similar but has no real reason to exist. And this is something that I think about with my own clothing brand, Club Utopia. The name contains a natural contradiction. A club can feel private, selective, and difficult to enter, and a utopia suggests an ideal place where people can belong. That gives the idea that I can explore through the clothing, imagery, and community around the brand. But that is Club Utopia's tension. Your brand needs to discover its own. Ask yourself which two ideas exist in conflict inside of your own identity. Once you identify them, use that tension consistently. Let it affect your materials, styling, photography, copywriting, and casting. That is how an abstract concept becomes a recognizable visual language. Now we're going to get into the fourth principle, which is treat your runway like a film. Henri Levy has described thinking of his shows like films. That means the runway needs more than attractive looks. It needs progression. Every film has a beginning, a change, and an ending. A runway presentation can do the same thing without using dialogue. The clothing can establish the characters so that the soundtrack can control attention. The location can establish the world. The movement of the models can reveal relationships. Your presentation could follow a simple 3-act structure. Act 1 is the introduction. Establish the world before you reveal everything. The music could be restrained. The colors could be limited. The silhouettes could be clean, uniform, or protective. And then give the audience time to understand the atmosphere. Act 2 is the transformation. The styling becomes more layered. New colors begin to appear. The pace changes. Graphics, symbols, or materials start spreading across the garments. The models might begin acknowledging one another. The audience should feel that something inside the world is changing. Act 3 is the revelation. This is where your strongest pieces appear. A final garment, character, or physical object completes the story. Your final look shouldn't simply be the most expensive outfit. It should provide the emotional ending. Imagine your first model entering alone, wearing something clothes, protective, and almost colorless. At the end, the same person returns in a more expressive look and is surrounded by the rest of the cast. The clothing has changed, but the person has changed too. Now your runway has an arc. Even if the audience cannot explain every detail, they can feel that something happened. The feeling is what stays with them. And you don't need a traditional runway to do this. You can create the same progression through a campaign. You can film it out inside your house, parking structure, empty field, warehouse, or school hallway. The format matters less than the story. If you only have 6 looks, make these 6 looks look like 6 scenes. If you only have 3 models, let each model represent a different stage of the transformation. Limitations can force you to make more intentional decisions, which is going to lead us into the fifth principle, which is create one unforgettable image. The audience will not remember every look. They will remember one image. ERD understands the value of a theatrical final gesture. Its fall 2025 show, for example, ended with a cardboard army tank accompanied by children wearing miniature versions of the collection. Whether someone loved it or disliked it, the image gave people something to discuss. That matters because a runway now exists in 2 places. It exists for the people physically attending, but it also exists through photographs, clips, and social media posts. One powerful image can create an entire collection online. It can become your thumbnail. It can become your campaign image. It can become the moment people send to their friends before producing a Before producing your presentation, ask yourself, what is the photograph I want people to remember? What would make someone pause while scrolling? What would make them ask, what brand is this? Maybe your final model carries an object that represents the collection. Maybe every model returns and forms your logo or symbol. Maybe a locked door opens during the finale. Maybe an empty environment gradually transforms throughout the presentation. Maybe the audience receives an object at the beginning that only makes sense when the final look appears. The objective isn't to create random shock value. The moment should complete the story. A memorable image with no connection to the collection may receive attention, but that attention won't necessarily help people understand the brand. The strongest final image makes the audience want to return to the beginning and watch again. Once you know what that image is, you can structure the entire presentation so that it moves forward towards that moment, right? And this is going to lead us to our sixth principle, and that's let the runway become a content system. Now, and also when I talk about the runway, I also just mean your social media posts. Obviously, everyone doesn't have enough pieces to do runway shoots, but we're just talking about the social media wise, like post, how you're going to frame your post, the structure that your post should have, and they should somewhat be progressive as you're revealing new pieces and collections, okay? But let the runway become a content system. A runway show should not exist for only 10 minutes. It should become a complete content system. For one presentation, you can produce a full runway film, a cinematic trailer, individual videos for each look. Now, to explain this for content, what I mean by this is I personally, how I shoot content is I do days because I have other things outside of running a clothing brand that I have to attend to. So what I go for is I do days. So, or like a weekend, like I'll be like, okay, I'm going to get a bunch of models on this day. And we're going to go out and we're going to film for 4 to 6 hours. And we're going to go to different locations. And it might be longer than that. It might be longer than 4 to 6 hours, but we also might take breaks in between there, right? But in those 2 days of filming, all right, because I also do this a lot whenever I go travel to go get content for the clothing brand, right? I minimum will have to leave with at least 10 images, 10 to 20 images, right? And at least 10 to 20 different videos that can be used to make at least 5 to 10 different posts on Instagram. We're going to try to get a website picture. We're going to try to get the main campaign picture. We're going to try to get we're going to try to get editorial shots. We're going to try to get one shots. We're going to try to get a 2-angle shot. We're going to try to get a bunch of different things in this time to save us time, right? You know what I'm saying? And also on top of this, what you can do is have somebody film you getting the content, and then it becomes a collection documentary, like a long form, which can be put on a YouTube channel, which I feel like a lot of brands don't do, and something that I'm kind of starting to do with this channel and what another channel I'll be doing in the future. But you can make a long form documentary, and then create short form content explaining individual garments from the pieces, right? Or from the collection or that you're doing, and that's more content. There's just so much. This is literally a content machine, and if you go and do your content shoots in days and in bursts, you won't get as burnt out. You won't have to wake up every day like, oh, what do I have to do for the clothing brand, or what do I have to do for my brand? You already have things prepared. Everything's already styled out. And this personally, like I said, just makes everything easier. It doesn't make everything as much of a hassle and trying to fetch models and, oh my God, is so-and-so going to be able to do this day, or that if I send the pieces, that it just makes it a lot easier, right? But let me know what you guys think about this down below as well, if you personally use this. But the last thing I also want to say about this is be very intentional with your audio. Whenever I first started doing this, I'm not gonna lie, I was using because whenever I started, the clothing brand scene was a lot different. It was like the ATL brands were really blowing up, and so a lot of what was blowing up on social media, like mainly TikTok, was like the ATL underground sounds, like the underground rap sounds, maybe yeah, that's really what was blowing up. So I was using a lot of those for my brand at first, which some of it would kind of resonate with the brand, but then there would be other times where I would feel like I didn't have an identity with the brand. Then I was like, well, does this music go with the brand or not? Should I post it or not? And you don't want to be running into that whenever you're posting, because then sometimes you might not want to post. You know what I'm saying? But there's so much that you can do with this type of content. Another thing that you can also do is model interviews for the shoot. Like, let's say you end up getting some models and are not your homies, or maybe if they are even are your homie or family, just interview them. Hey, what do you think about the brand for real outside of this? Da, da, da. How does it feel? What did you do to prepare for this? Just small stuff like that to show that your brand, one, is real, that you taking it serious. And it's just more content. Like, the more eyes that is brought towards your business, the better. Like, that's literally our goal at the end of the day. But yeah, it's your boy Haki, and I am out. Peace.